Hey everyone, higher running coach and Hogue athlete Sage Canaday here with another Training Talk Tuesday. We're going to go off on a different topic because Kilian Jornet, if you don't know who that is, greatest mountain trail runner of all time, the GOAT, released some training data. We're going to go through that, what we could take away from it as a coach, me looking at it, but also as a fellow sponsored mountain runner. At least I've finished second to Kilian, I guess, before, but also pretty far behind him. I say I've raced Kilian over the years, but he's usually finishing pretty far ahead of me. But, you know, seeing the insights of the greatest athletes in our sport, especially in mountain ultra trail running, and it's not just ultra marathons, it's also shorter distance mountain races that he's excelled at, I think is worth analyzing and learning from and trying to break that down kind of as a coach perspective, a scientific perspective, but also in terms of motivation and inspiration, and gracious that Kilian has shared this data. He tweeted it out. It's on an article that he wrote, as well as some other data through we're both sponsored by COROS GPS watches. That is a sponsor plug, where he's had some article blogs on there showing heart rate data from races like Zagama, which is one of my favorite races, most iconic mountain trail marathon 42K distance in the world, and other races like Sierras and All, Hard Rock, UTMB that he did in a sequence this year. So we're going to break it down in this training talk. Let's get started. Again, thanks for all your questions. We want to go with the top voted questions usually on these training talks, but thought this was an interesting topic. And rewind a bit, I knew of Kilian back in my road running days. I was at the running shop at Hanson's in Michigan, and I was looking at some trail runner, some magazine article, maybe it was in Runner's World or something, Running Times, rest in peace. And, you know, it's this picture of Kilian on this ridgeline, and it says how he's the greatest mountain runner in the world. And I was like, wow, this guy's got it figured out. This ridgeline looks beautiful. I want to run on these beautiful mountains. Sure enough, a couple years later, I was racing in the same races as Kilian at the Skyrunning World Champs. We ran the Rut 50K together. I finished behind him at the Rut 50K, second place to Kilian there. And then, you know, at Transvolcania, races like that over the years, doing that, seeing him go back and forth with Luis Alberto, but I was always third at Transvolcania, and Kilian either won or he got second. The thing with Kilian is that when he races these really competitive races, at his worst day, it's like he's always on the podium. So if he doesn't win, which he usually almost always wins, you know, if he has a really bad day, he might get second or third still. So, you know, I guess in the Yurok 100K Skyrunning World Champs 2013, he raced here in Colorado, Breckenridge to Vail. He was not on the podium there. He was like fourth place, I think, in that race, and I was like sixth place. That was the Skyrunning World Champs. So even back before the Golden Trail Series, racing Kilian at races like the Rut 50K. He ran the Speedgoat 50Ks, run there. A number of races, mountain races across the U.S. Skyrunning World Champs, got to race him there a couple times, 2013, 2014. Fast forward, of course, to Pikes Peak was probably one of my best races where I finished second to Kilian. Still pretty far behind him, though. Pikes Peak 2019, shout out with the photo there. But yeah, a great guy over the years, and definitely the GOAT in our sport, winning UTMB so many times, winning Hard Rock, course record at Hard Rock, winning Zagama, races like Zagama and Sierras and All, which are some of the most iconic sub-ultra distance mountain running events, really shows his range, as well as even running a sub 30-minute 10K on the roads. He doesn't like the flat uniform surfaces as much. He's a world-class technical downhill runner, but a very good mountain climber and all-around mountain athlete as well. Ski mountaineering, you name it. Kilian Jornet. We'll break it down in his writing in this blog post. I thought was very interesting because I don't mean to be critical as a coach, but I'm always thinking of it in terms of applying it to maybe people like you or the common runner who's not sponsored professionally, who doesn't have a bunch of time to train 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day necessarily. Maybe you get out for an hour on most days if you're lucky, who has a full-time job, who has a family. Kilian is also a family man now, more on that later. But, you know, you don't have all the sponsorship support, all the gear. You don't necessarily train in a beautiful area with a bunch of mountain trails and a bunch of vertical gain and beautiful, you know, scenery and stuff like that. So I realize a lot of people also don't have the base that someone like Kilian has. And we're going to start there with the aerobic base. And I think that's a main takeaway is the importance of aerobic base, and something I've always preached, especially as a road and track runner coming from that university background, cross country, running at a young age, playing sports like soccer, but realizing that lifetime base does matter. Initial genetic talent, so to speak, also does matter. And you got Kilian, talks about being born and raised in the mountains. He's a hardcore mountain athlete. You know, he was riding his bike around, he was skiing, he was rock climbing and running, doing all these things at a very young age at high altitude. Definitely has helped, but it's a nature and nurture blend too. Your specific training, your mental attitude, but then also genetics, lifestyle factors, who your parents are, can't really pick that, where you grew up, things like that that can motivate you as you try to progress in a sport like mountain ultra trail running, or if you're a road marathon runner. And again, we try to learn from these greats, and that's why I break down things, talking about Kilian's training in this talk, but also Kipchoge. If you look at, his amazing marathon times and running so fast in the marathon, what he does, growing up maybe in a training camp area, in altitude, training and having that mental attitude, but also breaking down the exact workouts and the physiology behind it, and realizing that, for a lot of people, it's not something you necessarily want to try to follow, right? A lot of professional athletes have the nature and nurture component. They have really good running form. They don't get injured, maybe running high volume. They grew up running for years and years and years. And, they have the time and resources to train at a lot higher of a level than maybe someone else. So playing the comparison game, I think, in this regard is a little bit dangerous, but there are some key takeaways. And again, with that point, a lot of people like to talk about N=1 studies, right? Kilian did this, and then he won Hard Rock. He did well at Sierra, he won UTMB, set the course record. He also set the course record and won Zagama earlier this year. That is a very hard thing to do. It's like, Kipchoge running the sub 2 hours in his marathon time trial. It's something that no one else does, because these guys are the greatest of all time. And, if you compare yourself maybe, or I try to compare myself to these other amazing athletes, you fall short in a lot of regards. And it's like, well, this person pulled it off, but does that apply to a large sample size, so to speak? So the N=1 stories, people have, special diets that they swear by. They say, oh, well, this worked for me in my N=1 study. Well, science doesn't like N=1 studies. That's the exception to the rule that people like to focus on sometimes. What you want in science generally is that N equals a huge sample size, a lot of numbers, because you're trying to find general principles and general takeaways that'll apply to the masses or to apply to most people. So if we look at Kilian, amazing aerobic base, I think the takeaway from that is that the importance of aerobic base, and the fact that he has such a large aerobic base over years and years of experience is that he doesn't have to rebuild base as much as maybe someone else who just started running 3 years ago or 8 years ago, right? I found that a little bit in my own training. I have a natural base in a certain level, and I could bounce back, some lower mileage, or I could bounce back up to 100K per week or 60K a week or 150K a week very quickly, at least in the past, because of that base. But if you're a newer runner, you got to start slow. You got to start with smaller mileage totals and numbers, and you got to realize that building aerobic base is a process of years. It's not just a matter of a couple weeks of high mileage, a couple months here and there. It's years of consistency over a long time that gets you those aerobic adaptations that take a long time to develop. And it makes your muscles stronger, your tendons stronger, improves your running efficiency, running economy, but it's also working at the cellular level with capillary bed density, mitochondria size and function. So these things internally with improving blood flow and muscle function and efficiency, fat burning, happen with this aerobic adaptation process. Now, to break that down even more, he talks a lot about zone training, right? Big fan of the 5-zone theory, 5-zone training theory. Check out my other training talks on that. Zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, and different thresholds, lactate threshold probably being the most important in there, but realizing that a lot of the training, a lot of the base training, talking zone 1, zone 2, right? Easy aerobic mileage. I've preached it over and over for the last decade plus on here. It's so you run easy and you could talk while you're running. You're not even breathing so hard. Kilian took it another step, I noticed though in the vlog. He talks about nose breathing, which I've been looking more into breathing techniques, more nose breathing, so to speak, is a healthier way to breathe when you're, sitting around relaxed, the nose filters a lot of things. It helps with belly breathing, diaphragm type of awareness. And I've looked into that more because of my breathing issues mainly, but realized that he's talking about going at such a low intensity, he could run and be breathing out of his nose only. I can't really do that. Maybe I can't breathe as well now because of my pulmonary embolism, but I have allergies, stuffed up nasal passages, sometimes deviated septum a little bit, but it kind of nails home the point that you're taking your easy days so easy, and some mileage days are easy enough that not only can you talk while you run, you could also maybe breathe out of your nose mainly, maybe not all the time, but it's that low of an intensity, right? Zone 1 is what he's talking about. It does help to be in good shape, have lower heart rate values at these zones, but that's the whole point, is that you're being patient and you're not taking your easy days too hard or trying to force everything into up-tempo zone or over zone 2 on your truly easy days. And that's kind of the importance there. But Kilian, he's still doing some high quality workouts, right? He talks about the zone 2, zone 3 workouts. And what you see is maybe he wasn't running super high mileage because he had this series of competitive races that he had to do that were quite different. If you've run Zagama and then go into something, I've never done Hard Rock, that's the only one I haven't done, but I've done Zagama, Sierra. Those are quite fast, intense races. Zagama wasn't quite as muddy, I don't think, this year, and that was a huge factor in the faster times. But Kilian's won it over and over the last 10 years, 12 years, and it's an iconic race, a very competitive race, and to win there was huge. And he shared some of his heart rate data, I believe, with COROS on that, as well as maybe at the Hard Rock. I'll pull up some of the screenshots there from the COROS blog. And what we see is a lot of spikes on the uphills, tremendously hard, high-intensity effort spikes, like over threshold, over lactate threshold spikes. So we're talking about some really high-intensity climbing in these races that are over, at least in Zagama, over 3 hours, in Sierra around 2.5 hours. So over a road marathon duration for an athlete like Kilian, and you're seeing these really high heart rate spikes on the uphills, but he's being able to recover on the downhills with lower heart rate values. And it kind of reminded me more of cycling, not that I know a ton about road cycling, but you see, early on in these tour stages or races, the pack's going easy, that you're in the peloton, you're drafting, maybe it's flat, but then at the end there's a break because they're going up this massive climb and they're pushing big watts, big heart rate values, and that's what the margin of victory comes in, is in this final push, these really high intensity pushes in these multi-hour long events or multi-day events, multi-week events in the tour. So, it ebbs and flows a lot in mountain ultra trail running in that regard. Whereas in road marathon running, Kipchoge going for sub 2, right? He's just stringing together very even 250 kilometer splits, 248 kilometer splits at very constant values, very constant stride rate. So it's a lot different in road marathon running versus mountain ultra trail running. But Kilian's showing his range because he's winning these races, half marathon trail races, mountain races, vertical K, marathon distance, Sierra like 33K, so it's like a 20-mile mountain race. And then the 100-milers like Hard Rock and UTMB, very mountainous, long ultra marathon races, and Hard Rock being at really high altitude. So, he's got this mix in training that a lot of people, nobody could really pull off that we've seen. And, I like to preach that I do any surface, any distance, because I did some road marathons and then mixed it with mountain running. Not very well, though. Not very well. Especially, I've suffered really bad at over 100K ultra marathons. Not so much my cup of tea. Kilian's shown this exceptional range over all sorts of mountain races, be them more technical or even more smooth, runnable trails. He's actually extremely fast on those as well. But it comes back to having this balance in training that I think is a good takeaway, especially with the aerobic base, mixing in these workouts. And I think he could get away with it maybe more so than other people because he has so much experience in the mountains and so much of a mix of his training and that aerobic base that he's able to transition very quickly. It's not something you necessarily want to try to do because you could get injured or you could overtrain very easily. But he's also doing these longer aerobic-based threshold efforts. We see these long run efforts where he's pushed the uphill, he's pushed some flats, more in an up-tempo to lactate threshold tempo zone, but nothing too crazy or too hard or too fast. And that's a lot of benefits there, right? He's saying he didn't do any super long runs over 4 hours, 5 hours. He also says he doesn't eat or drink during most of his training runs, which I would not recommend for most people either. You definitely could, do some fat burning runs where you're not eating a bunch of carbs, but you definitely want to stay hydrated on most runs. And, he did say he tested out his fuel though on some runs, right? Carb loading, so to speak, or ingesting the amount that you have to take during a race is good to practice in long runs. But yeah, you wouldn't necessarily be eating all your carbs, and he does eat a lot of carbs. If you see that, that's another takeaway. High carb intake during these races to fuel himself for these big uphill pushes and these record-breaking performances. So we can take away something from that. And the quality of the long runs is another thing. Coach Sandy and I have always preached having some specific hard long run efforts and mimicking kind of a race simulation, so to speak, or doing tempo work within the context of a long run, having some faster miles. So it's not just about going long, slow distance, but actually throwing down in long runs. And you see that he's done that quite a bit as well, running a 50K run workout pretty hard, at least with some fast kilometer splits in there before Zagama. And even, racing himself into shape, so to speak, doing some of these longer extended efforts that are pretty hard, but they're not super long, 2 to 3 hours. So for someone of his caliber, running the weekly total and volume that he does, that's not too insane compared to other pro-sponsored athletes that I've heard of doing some crazy sessions or crazy high mileage or crazy long runs super hard to prepare for these races. But again, he's got the experience and he obviously knows what he's doing, winning all these races, setting these record-breaking performances. The final takeaway, he had all sorts of things in this vlog that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for most people either. He says he averages about 6 hours of sleep per night, which I thought was pretty amazing. I know a lot of you parents out there especially, you probably maybe get a lot less than that, or you have a demanding job. It's hard to get in that extra sleep. I would generally advocate trying to sleep as much as possible. 7 or 8 hours might be a luxury for some of you, but if you're training that hard, running that high mileage, doing these ultra races, it does seem that sleep, especially high quality sleep, will help with these recoveries and to further your training. I like to sleep a lot more, but maybe I'm just lazy and more tired. And then also I wouldn't necessarily recommend, I thought it was really interesting on some of his notes, at least before Zagama and Sierra Zinal, that he did a 30-minute warm-up jog, apparently. I'm not sure if that was maybe lost in translation and that maybe he jogged 15 minutes and then did some drills and strides and that it took 30 minutes before the race to warm up, or that he actually did a 30-minute run before the start of these races. Because I found that a little surprising, especially for like Zagama. It's going to be close to a 4-hour effort at his speed. It's a big marathon with a lot of climbing in the trails, mountains, and you don't want to be tapping into burning any extra calories or warming up more than you necessarily need to. Most pro road marathon runners that I've seen, especially before like Boston or New York, they'll jog around very slowly for maybe 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes, but you usually don't want to be running, over 5 kilometers on your warm-up jog before a race that's like a marathon. Sierra Zinal, I could see warming up a little bit more because it's such a high-intensity start, but 30 minutes is a lot. I'd personally warm up like 5 or 10 minutes. Some people maybe 15 minutes of actual running and then some strides and light drills, so I don't pull a muscle, but that was interesting and not something I'd recommend for most people for sure. But a final takeaway, going back to the aerobic base and the periodization, is his attitude mentally, but also in terms of mixing in different routines. And I think it stemmed from his childhood of being an all-around mountain athlete, loving the mountains like so many of us do, and being able to be involved in so many different sports, cycling for fun, but also cycling, riding a bike for fitness. Obviously, ski mountaineering is a huge part of his winter training block. And I think the timing of that, being in the Northern Hemisphere, being in a place where it snows a lot in the winter, I could relate kind of being in Colorado now, is that you're kind of forced to transition to skis in the winter because there's so much snow on the ground, it's hard to run. Now, he was still doing ski mountaineering sessions, 2 to 3 hours on the skis, a lot of vertical, and then doing a PM session, maybe a 40-minute to 60-minute treadmill run on his treadmill in the evenings. Part of that maybe because he had to watch his kids. But, that transition, they also don't get much daylight, I think, at that high, but I digress. Anyway, that mix of doing different sports, of being involved in something like mountaineering, alpinism, climbing, right? He likes to climb some really technical stuff. He's done Everest, some really high altitude pushes. So you're mixing in climbing, using your upper body, maybe some power hiking. You're mixing in cycling. You're mixing in ski mountaineering, and we're talking about skiing uphill on skins, and then also transitioning to downhill skiing, maybe even a little cross-country skiing. I don't know if he does that so much, but other pro-sponsored mountain ultra trail athletes definitely do cross-country skiing. But having that mix and stressing the body in different ways, but maintaining that aerobic fitness is a great takeaway. And I think the other key component, and this is what I'll close on, is that mental attitude of just being passionate about the mountains, loving what you're doing, not seeing it as a chore that you're training, but that you're having fun exploring and you're out on an adventure and you could push your body in different ways and be well-rounded. Is going to help with hopefully the injury prevention, overall strength, not just skeletal muscular strength, and getting the metabolism revved up for good fat burning and glycogen, saving glycogen stores for those big hard pushes, but mentally giving yourself that break, and of course improving heart and lung and blood flow efficiency, which is real key to this sport. So that's my rant on Kilian's data. Again, check out some of those COROS blogs, the COROS blog that he contributed to, analyzing his data and the heart rate. He talked about HRV on the COROS Watch too. That is a sponsor plug. Monitoring that, because he did get COVID going into UTMB as well. But that's a whole other topic of discussion. Thank you so much for all your support on here. Again, the Patreon supporters for really making this channel possible. Stay tuned for more future training talk topics as well as announcements. My own training vlogs on here. Thank you so much for watching these videos, liking them, subscribing on here. It really helps Coach Sandy and I out a lot. We sell training plans at higherrunning.com. Give us a follow on social media at Higher Running for some cool announcements. We got a new product coming out we're really excited to launch. So thank you so much for your support. Hope you're doing well, and stay tuned for more VO2 Max Productions.